Xander.
Hello everyone, this is Sirr's Movies, the official podcast of SirWaka.com. I'm your host, Sterling Woods, and today I'm joined by
Evan Todd-McCoy.
Welcome to the show. This week we're going to discuss what we've seen over the past week and follow that up with an in-depth review. This week's movie is Stephen Knight's Serenity, the new Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway film. You can find more episodes on Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, and pretty much any other podcast app. You can contact us directly at sirsmovies@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Sirr's Movies, or join the Facebook group, Sirr's Movies on Facebook. That's pretty much it. Before we get started this week, I owe everyone a formal apology. I'm going to go ahead and eat crow. Last week, I was adamant. I told Evan that the scene with Elijah from Glass in the Tilt-A-Whirl, I said that was definitely in the original Unbreakable. I remember seeing it. You're an absolute liar saying it. It was from the deleted scene. And then after we saw it, I went back and watched Unbreakable. And it was not in the movie. It was definitely a deleted scene. I forgot I owned it on DVD, and I probably watched it there. So this is me issuing a formal apology. I was wrong. Okay.
And the way I said my name this week was me doing a bit because I'm trying to be smug. I hope that sounded smug when I said my name. That's what I was trying to do.
Indeed. All right, so let's get into it. What have you seen over the past week?
I saw one movie, a movie called Low Life from 2017. Kind of like a indie grindhousey type movie that was pretty good, actually. I think it was a bit of an indie darling when it came out. But I haven't seen it, or hadn't seen it until now, so I'll talk about that a little bit. Basically, it's about a luchador who his name's El Monstro, and he's caught up in some criminal activity. But the movie peels back layers to reveal that it's kind of got some sociopolitical themes going on that are really unexpected, and it's kind of wrapped up in this sort of, I don't know, it almost feels like it's one of those fast-paced, kind of goofy but glossy crime movies. It almost glamorizes crime fiction a little bit, but then it slowly kind of peels that back and does something different. So without spoiling anything, I like that one quite a bit, and you should check it out if it sounds like your cup of tea.
Okay, yeah, I've actually never heard of that one, so glad you got to check it out. Anything else interesting?
Outside of movies, I saw the season finale for season 5 of Steven Universe. I kind of think that might be my favorite show of all time now.
Oh wow!
Which might just be the high. Yeah, it might be the high. I've seen a lot of TV shows. It might be the high of the finale. They're talking about doing a movie to kind of wrap everything up, but I don't think it's necessary. If you're a fan of the show and you've seen the finale, I feel like they should or could just leave it right where it is and it'd be perfect.
So is that season finale or series finale?
It's sort of the series finale. They're not going to be making any more episodes, but they're talking about doing some kind of movie later this year. The show has a really spotty release schedule, so there might be some people listening who've watched it, but then kind of it just fell by the wayside, and that would largely owe to the fact that it's never had a consistent release schedule. It's not like you can go and it's Thursday night, tonight is Steven Universe night. Nah, it's more like every few months they dump 5 episodes at a time. And before that, there would be a whole year where there were no new episodes and things like that. So it got to 5 seasons. It took about 6 or 7 years to get to 5 seasons. And altogether, it's one of the most consistent of the kind of post-Adventure Time animated sort of fantasy shows. It's really, really, really good. It's got a whole bunch of really awesome sort of social themes that are super topical, but it's done in a way where it's really not drawing attention to that stuff. It kind of just feeds it through a really fantastical premise and some pretty lighthearted kind of comedy tackling heavier subjects. And the finale kind of mixed all that up, as well as the show's lore and some action stuff. And it was really satisfying. It's about the most satisfying series finale I can think of.
Yeah, that's one of those shows that I know exists because I spend time on the internet and people like to, make GIFs out of it and talk about it. And I know it's doing some interesting things, social commentary wise, but it's one of those that never, never hooked me. I never got into it. Same thing with Adventure Time. I've watched a few episodes. I know it's a solid show, but it's just something I never particularly cared to sit down and burn through. But yeah,
that stuff you might come back on some of this stuff when your kid gets a little older and starts getting interested in cartoons, because I think one difference between you and me is I think I've seen a lot and appreciate animated and kid shit a little bit more. I don't know if that's fair to say. We've only touched on this a couple times, but if I'm right about that, a lot of it comes from the fact that like when my daughter was a lot younger, Adventure Time was like still in its like beginning kind of couple seasons, and I watched it with her. And by the end of it, she kind of grew out of cartoons, but I'm still kind of like watching them. And when she was a kid, one of my favorite things to do with her was watch old movies that she'd never seen, like old Disney movies that I grew up with, or take her to the theater to see kids movies. And so I learned pretty quickly, which ones were worth like watching, because I'm sitting there watching a movie and something like Alphas or whatever, or that Alpha Dogs, that terrible dog singing one, that was awful, right? But that's different from something like Moana, which is actually really good for what it is. So I kind of, I ended up watching so many of these things that I kind of learned to like appreciate the good ones. And I'd say that goes for the cartoon TV shows as well. So I'd say Adventure Time and definitely Steven Universe are some of the really good ones that are worth watching even if you're an adult. But I kind of feel like watching it with a kid is like a gateway into that stuff. It might be hard to keep up with if you don't have a kid clamoring for that new episode every day or whatever. That's how I got into it anyway.
Yeah. Any other TV you've been watching this week?
Still watching season 2 of Future Man. It's still awesome and really funny. And True Detective season 3 I've been watching. So it's 3 episodes in. I know that you haven't seen the new season, but you should check it out. Even if you didn't like the first season or second season very much, the third season's a different story. They do a different story every season. It's been a long time coming for this one, and it's good so far. It's atmospheric. It's a little bit darker again, and Marshall Ali is killing it. His performance is just really, really good, and kind of worth coming to just for that.
Yeah, that's another one of those shows where I just I watched the first few episodes of season 1. It was kind of interesting, but I just never finished it. And I heard people talking about how it ends, so I went back and watched the final episode. And it's just, I guess just because I missed the middle stuff, I just didn't care as much as to how it ended. And so I never went back and watched it. And I heard season 2 was universally panned, so I never cared for that. So I just don't care to see it.
You might like it. Yeah. You might like season 2.
I think the only reason I even care to see season 3 is because of Mahershala Ali. And I don't think that's enough of a reason for me to make, actually invested time to watch it. There are other shows out there that just I'm actually interested in. So I'll probably, check those out before. So it's probably
that's
one
fair.
of those I miss. But I think us talking about shows I missed is a good segue into what I've been watching.
Yeah.
I did watch 8th Grade. I don't know if we talked about that on here, but how'd you, I know you watched that as well. How'd you like that?
I loved that movie. To me, it was kind of like, so last year, Lady Bird was a big deal, and like everybody was like, oh, this is a great coming of age movie, blah, 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 blah. And I thought Lady Bird was kind of bad and had sort of a bad message for young people, and I know that's rich coming from me, a dude, so take this with a grain of salt, but I just thought it was really condescending, and it was very unchallenging to its main character, and I thought everything that it was trying to do and say 8th Grade does and says with 100% more authenticity. If 8th Grade felt really relevant and real, especially the way the kids act and the way they mitigate pop culture and media, that felt all more real to me than anything in Lady Bird. And I know Lady Bird takes place in the 90s or something, I think, if I remember that right. So it's a little different, but I just thought 8th Grade was, you didn't see it, right? So I compare those two movies a lot. And 8th Grade I thought was fantastic. The stuff, I have a daughter, right? And she's around the same age as the girl in 8th Grade. So all the stuff with her dad just killed me, 8th Grade is probably a pretty personal experience for me then in that way.
Yeah, I really liked it. Like I said, I think, Bo Burnham got a whole lot of love for directing it and kind of knocking it out of the park. And I really love Bo Burnham. I think he's probably one of the better comedians we have out right now. Just the way he treats comedy and kind of what he does with it. I think he's an excellent comedian, and I hope he continues to make comedy as well as movies. But yeah, probably the biggest issue I had with eighth grade is it wasn't, it's one of those quieter movies that isn't really about anything, more or less. It's just kind of about, it's just a snippet of somebody's life, so there's no climactic scene. There's no, whatever. It's just kind of, just a day in the life kind of movie. And I don't know. I do think it did an awesome job. I think the actors did a great job. And I think, it really represented kind of what that experience is. And it made you cringe at times. It made you, emote at times. And, when there's a scene where she walks into a pool party. This isn't, it makes you, feel for a kid. Like, oh man, this is going to be a tough experience for you. It makes you think about your middle school years and all the awkward, dates and times you had and whatnot. So, if nothing else, I think he did a really good job representing kind of what that is like. It wasn't a TV version of eighth grade. I feel like he really did a good job of, presenting,
that's well put.
What that experience was. So, especially him being a first time version. Yeah. Especially him being a first-time director, I think he knocked it out of the park. So I look forward to what he does next, both comedically and in the film world.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to point out that that's really nicely put. That it's not a TV version of what it's like to be in eighth grade. That's pretty. Yeah, that kind of sums the movie up super well. Before I heard you say that, my summary for it was like a more concise snapshot version of Boyhood, but about a girl.
Yeah.
that's kind of how I thought of it until you said that. But I actually kind of like that.
Yeah, appreciate it. And I think we're going to go on to another thing we both watched. So we talked about Yorgos Lanthimos' The Favorite a few weeks back, and I talked about how I saw most of his bigger stuff, but I never got around to seeing Dogtooth. So this week I watched Dogtooth, and that that was a interesting film, to put it the least. I had no idea. I'm a big fan of the spoiler-free stuff, so I had no idea really what it was about other than what's on the posters. I know there was something with teeth about it. So not to give away what that movie is, but it's very specific, very, I don't know, that's another thing where it's really, it's the director is 90% of that movie, just telling his style and, just him making that movie kind of, you can see how he became the guy that made The Lobster and the guy that made Killing of a Sacred Deer. There's a lot of that in there. It was a very, I don't know, odd movie. I think I put it like that. But like in a, in a good way, not just odd for the sake of being odd, but it's very artistic, kind of thing. And I don't know, it went in a weird direction, it kind of, and I love how it doesn't grab your hand and walk you and tell you what's going on. It just kind of gives you clues and you kind of piece together what the situation is yourself. And I don't know, it's a very, moving and very, interesting. I keep coming back to that word. It's a very interesting story. So it's a hard one to recommend just because it is so specific. You got to really know kind of what you're getting into, because if you just think you're going to see a regular movie and you go spend 2 hours watching that, you're going to walk out with a big question mark over your head. But I definitely do think it was an interesting movie, and I'm glad I saw it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's been a while for me. I saw it some years back, but I just remember it being like, I remember laughing a lot through it because it was so audacious. And that's kind of Yorgos Lanthimos in a nutshell, right? Like, you kind of have to laugh at some of the choices that he makes in storytelling. And for Dogtooth is a movie where a psychologist couple raises their 3 kids in almost like an experiment, like their whole lives are basically confined in this household where the parents are sort of experimenting with whether or not they can create a reality for their kids that's really out of sync with like what we would expect reality to be like. So they one of the ways that pops up that's really easy to talk about without spoiling anything is linguistics. So like the kids think certain words mean other way different things than what we would say they meant.
I think we're well into spoiler territory at this
point. Are we? Okay.
Yeah,
well, if we are,
I was trying to talk around it because it was very,
okay.
Yeah. But I mean,
do you feel like there's a statute of limitations on that because the movie's been out for like it's an older movie now?
Yeah.
What,
So
2000.
If you haven't been spoiled enough and you're still listening, skip ahead about 3 minutes. So spoilers.
I'm not gonna say much more. I'm just gonna say like I dug all that. There's a boldness to that. There's a commitment to an idea that I really like. Like, even if something Dogtooth isn't my favorite movie of his, but even if there's gonna be, if you're gonna commit to something weird, to me it's like really, you got to really commit. which is interesting because that kind of connects to the movie we're going to talk about a little bit later. But like, Dogtooth is a very strange movie, and you were saying before that you hadn't seen it because you never really necessarily felt like you were in the mood for it. And do you feel like now that was like that you had some insight that you didn't know you had? Like, do you still feel like that's a movie you have to like be in the right mood to watch?
Yeah, I still do. I mean, because I watched it, I think at like 10 o'clock at night by myself in a dark room. So I think that's kind of, I mean, you got to really know it's something you can't watch while you're being distracted, because somebody will walk in and say, "What are you watching?" And you're not going to have an answer for it because it's just so off the wall. There are some awkward sex scenes, and there's some weird, like the kids act weird, and it's just, I mean, it's because the parents are borderline. Well, not borderline. It's child abuse. They're locking these kids up, making them believe that this is the world. They think cats are demons. Fish are demons. Anything that isn't them is an other. At one point, the siblings are sleeping with each other. It's just actually, the logic behind it isn't even explained in the movie. They just kind of, go with it. But yeah, so I mean, it's an off-the-wall story, and since we're in spoilers now, I'm going to go ahead and say I think the way it ended was, it's really hard to describe. It's
I don't really remember the ending. So
okay, so in the ending, well, throughout the movie, there are three kids. There's the girl's the oldest, the boy's in the middle, and then the younger girl. I guess the lie that they've told is whenever your canine tooth falls out, you're old enough to go out into the world and experience it for yourself. Right. But canine don't fall out, so that never happened. And the older girl is rebelling piece by piece until the end of the movie. She just takes a 1 pound weight and knocks her own tooth out.
Right.
Then she hides in her dad's trunk and he goes to work, and the final still of the movie is the camera focusing on the trunk and then, fade to black. So just, I guess it's, I don't know, uplifting is the word I keep thinking about, but that's not, it's a really weird way to define exactly what that is.
I think you're right. I think if it's a weird story about somebody like rebelling and getting freedom, it wouldn't even be the weirdest version of that I've seen. I mean, I would say that Human Centipede is basically that. Yeah, I think that movie is about the triumph of the human spirit, honestly. But Dogtooth, I saw around the same time, and they actually have some things in common. But I think uplifting or hopeful is not it's a weird movie to ascribe that sentiment to. I agree with you, but I think I agree with you also that it belongs.
Yeah, indeed. And that's been about 3 minutes, so welcome back if you skipped forward. So, like I said, I think we think it's an interesting movie, so it's worth checking out, especially if you're a Yorgos Lanthimos fan. But another thing we have both seen, and I think this is the final movie of what we've been seeing. It's actually Roma. I watched that, and I'm putting an asterisk next to what we both seen because I watched about half of it and just didn't care to finish it. So I know it is nominated for an Oscar for Best Film, but it's a very, like we were talking about 8th Grade, it's a very specific kind of quiet movie, and it's not, necessarily about anything. And I know it probably is a good movie, and I know, just from, osmosis of being on the internet, I know kind of where it goes and whatnot, and it probably is a very good movie. I just, like I said, I think I fell asleep watching it once, and then I came back to watch it again, and just, I think I was on my phone. It's just something to where I just didn't feel like finishing it. So it's just, I know it's a good movie, and I feel like if I would have watched it in the theater, I may have appreciated it more rather than watching it on Netflix, but I just couldn't power through it. And I know you thought it was, pretty good, I believe. It's one of those that just doesn't work for me.
Well, I think my review on sirwalker.com, like most of my reviews, it might be until you read the whole thing. I think my hope is that when people read my reviews on your website, that they can tell basically what I thought of the movie without it being a binary, like this is good, this is bad. But like Roma, like I had sort of the same experience as you up until maybe about 2/3 of the way through. So I would say you maybe just quit too early. But at the same time, it raises an interesting question. Is a movie that can't get your attention, if it's 2 hours and 15 minutes long, if it can't get your attention in the first hour, is it worth finishing? Because it does kind of start to there a narrative and a more conventional pacing starts to kind of take control of the movie around the 2/3 of the way through point. But the style or genre that the movie is, cinema verite, it doesn't generally do that. So I was actually kind of surprised when it eventually did start to kind of feel like it was running towards something, and it does. But did you see the scene? And you're gonna have to skip ahead, kids at home, because I'm gonna spoil a little bit of this movie. Just to ask Sterling a question. So, if you're listening to this, skip ahead a bit if you want. I don't think Roma is the kind of movie that you can really spoil, though, for what it's worth. So, and I got to get a little personal here, too. But a question I want to ask you, Sterling, is did you get to the part where she has the baby?
I did not.
So something about the movie and that scene that's personal for me is that when I was 21, my girlfriend at the time, who is my daughter's mom, we were expecting a second child, and we lost it. And I was there when we lost it and stuff. And I had an experience not unlike the experience that this woman has, because she loses the baby. I'm spoiling it for you a little bit.
Well, I know.
Sorry.
I know that happened.
Oh, you knew about that? Okay, good. Because I was actually just thinking, oh shit, I'm not just spoiling this for people listening when they shouldn't be, but I'm spoiling it for you too. But anyway, that scene, the lead up to that specific moment, and then everything after that is sort of where the movie revealed what it was about to me. And it's not about losing a kid. It's about a bunch of socioeconomic stuff, like I wrote about in the review. But that's when it started to sort of become clear. Like, it's a movie that took a really long time, almost like a cloud forming the shape of an animal or something. It took a really long time to cohere into something that I could actually analyze. But that moment was so moving and emotional for me personally that I think it bought a certain amount of loyalty from on a subjective plane for me that it might not have gotten from anyone, right? So that's something that stood out.
Like, from what I understand, she loses the baby in a really emotionally reserved way. I think that's kind of what I understand it being. And then the rest, from there on, it's just kind of how she is, kind of where she is and the life she has to lead. And, it's dark, and it's, this is life for her. It's a day in the life of, not day in the life, but, a snippet in the life of this person living this type of life. And, I just, from what I've actually heard, that scene is harrowing, and it's just,
It is.
I don't know if how the movie ends is going to justify me putting myself through that. That's kind of from what I understand.
Oh no, I don't blame you. Like, if I would have known, like, okay, so if we went back in time 11 years and I knew that scene was coming, I wouldn't have watched the movie.
Yeah.
So I don't blame you at all for like not wanting to subject yourself to that. I will say though that part of the movie fits into like a standard screenwriting structure of like, what they call the dark moment of the soul, or the low point. So after that, the movie does not submit to darkness. It's actually a fairly uplifting and humanistic and moving, kind of lighthearted. Lighthearted isn't the right word, but it's positive. Yeah. Overall, the movie's got a positive message, and it's about positivity, not about negativity or loss. Although those things are part of life, so of course it goes there. But that's, maybe in a year or two you should come back and try to finish it. But, I don't blame you for turning it off.
Yeah, I think I wanted to see it more as a completionist kind of thing, because, I'm a big fan of Alfonso Cuarón, and I know that it's, like I said, it's nominated for Best Picture, so I wanted to see it just to see it. But an hour into it, however far I was in, I was just, I was like, you know what, I don't care to finish this. There's so much other TV I want to watch, and I kind of know where this is going, so I think I'd be seeing it just to see it. So at that point I checked out. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on. Let's get a little bit brighter.
Yep. How about some movie news?
Well, speaking of Oscar movies, let's get into the movie news. They did release the Oscar nominations this week. I am not a big Oscar fan. I think I never watched the Oscars. I just kind of watched the highlights to see who won, and I read the articles, seeing what people say they care about, that kind of thing. But were you interested at all in these nominations, any snubs or anything, you thought about after finding about?
I haven't followed the Oscars since 2005 when Crash won, which I thought was I thought that was a travesty. And until that, I know there's like always been like a cabal of like critical types and people who like movies a lot that have always kind of considered the Oscars to be a joke, but I didn't really join that group until 2005. But ever since then, I haven't really paid attention. So that's like 14 years of me not giving a shit. And I was like 19 in 2005, 2005. I'd been like into movies for about 4 or 5 years by that point. I started when I was a teenager, really getting into them and following them. But ever since then, I haven't really cared. I mean, I like you, I always, through osmosis, I always hear about who's nominated. I always hear about the controversies, the snubs, the drama that ensues. But I feel like it's all really self-contained, and it's kind of a popularity contest for a bunch of old white guys to sort of vote on movies that are usually, they'll pick the movie that's about movies, right? So, like, I mean, that's a cliche about the Oscars. And it's kind of just its own ecosystem. And so I don't think the awards really have any merit outside of the ecosystem. And it's an industry event. So it's really just about clapping people in the industry on the back. And I'm not just talking about the actors. I'm talking about the famous people. Because one of the big controversies that I did follow was when Life of Pi won some stuff, and as they were accepting their award, the VFX company responsible for 90% of what, they were shutting down because they aren't getting paid, and VFX is like the salt mines of filmmaking and has been for over a decade. So like stuff like that just really turns me off. But yeah, I know there's some interesting new changes with this year's Oscars in terms of categories and what movies are being nominated. Is there anything that stood out to you that was like worth talking about?
Oh, again, it's that I mean, they are kind of what they are. I don't particularly care about the awards. I know it's a big, pay to win kind of thing. If you know the right guys and pay the right advertisements, that's how you get into the front running, that kind of thing.
Right.
But at the same time, when a black man wins, it's the first time a black man has won an Oscar, that kind of thing, So it is still important because it is such a cultural thing. It is kind of the biggest movie event. So even though it is a bit shady and backroom dealy, and, that obviously there are types of movies that win Oscars. Green Book got a lot of hype because of the type of movie it is, and we knew that was going to be Oscar nominated, and boom, here it is, So it's just the kind of thing it's gameable. People can game the system, and but still, it's a big deal. It's kind of so that's why people pay attention to it, whether they care about it or not. I'm looking at the list of best pictures, and they're all a similar type, except for Vice. Vice is probably a curveball in it, but like the lead actor, I've seen one of the movies in lead actor, and I've seen 1.5 of the lead actress movies. So it's just there is a certain game to it, and but still, it's the biggest game in town, so you got to watch it. But
yeah, I won't subject myself to watching the actual fucking ceremony and all that. I can't do it. It's too long, and it's usually really, really boring. I remember a couple of years ago I tried, when I think James Franco was the him and somebody else were the hosts, and he just shat the bed, I think. He just didn't have it wasn't his night, maybe, I don't know, but like I just remember it being kind of embarrassing, so I didn't get into it. I will say though that Vice is exactly the kind of movie that gets Oscar attention, even though it came out a fucking week before the Oscar nominees were announced. Like they love movies like Vice. I do appreciate them including stuff like Black Panther in there, because they usually throw, like, for me, usually like for Best Picture, there's always a toss-out to like a genre movie, and this year it's Black Panther, which deserves it more than any of the other ones.
Well, honestly, I think that was not a token, but I think that was a peace offering. I don't necessarily think
that's a good way
people
to put
thought that this was the best movie of the year, especially not the Oscars people, but I think because of the hype and just because of how big of a cultural impact it had, and people were already talking about the Oscars in February because of how big it was, that they felt like, well, we've got to add it, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, people, like, that's the thing about nowadays, is that the award season starts in fucking February now. It used to be that no movies that didn't come out after September were really going to be worth considering, because that's when they dump all the, like, really big, prestigious movies. And now the studios have caught on to the fact that that you can release it's kind of like a Black Swan movie in the middle of spring, or even in January in some cases, and it'll actually be people will love it, or it'll catch on. So it's like a gamble, right? I feel like Annihilation was kind of like that, although there's some stories about how that movie was handled in terms of marketing and release that suggest otherwise. Of the Best Picture nominees, would you go for I know that was your favorite movie last year. Would you go for Black Panther as your Best Picture pick?
I mean, personally, yeah, but I don't think that'll be the winner. I think
what do you think will be? What's your prediction? While we're talking about this fucking anyway, right?
Yeah. Say we just spent 5 minutes talking about how we don't care about it, and spend five more minutes into it. But yeah, I don't know.
That's the hypocrisy of talking about the Oscars at all.
Yeah. I have no idea. Because I really don't care. And I feel like if that's the thing, it's a double-edged sword. Because if Black Panther wins, I'll feel like there'll be an asterisk next to it, and if it doesn't win, I feel like there'll be an asterisk next to it. So it really just, I really couldn't care less one way or the other. But I will be there, and I'll be there, but I'll watch the clips the next day, and you know, I'll be interested in seeing.
That's about what they'll get from me is the clips. I want to see people crying and giving each other dirty looks. If I had to say what movie I would like to win of the nominees, it'd be The Favorite. But what I think is going to win is Roma.
Gotcha. Yeah,
that's my prediction.
Both of those seem like very Oscar-y, Oscar winner type movies. So it could be.
The Favorite doesn't, though. That's the thing. I think The Favorite is a Black Swan pick. I don't think The Favorite is the kind of movie they normally would like.
Well, I do, just because it's so off the wall and artsy. I feel like that's the kind of they took a swing, and it's very different, but it has big names and it's very actory. So I think that's the kind of
that is kind of I think it's in there because I honestly think it's in there because it's a period movie, like because it's a costume drama. That's the only reason I think it's in there, but that's why I hope it wins. Kind of, it'd be awesome if Black Panther won, but I just can't get my heart can only get so broken, right?
Yeah.
So.
All right, but probably the last piece of movie news we're going to talk about is the Bryan Singer controversy. It's, I don't know, the Me Too movement, quote unquote, has lately, it's been kind of, they're stretching us to, kind of what we're upset about. But I think this is a prime example of stuff that, why is this even a thing? Why is he still directing movies? Like, why? Just when I feel like we argue about little pedantic things, something like this happens. It's like, okay, yeah, that's why this movement exists. We got to get this guy the heck out of here, that kind of thing. But I know you got some thoughts on it. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you about that totally. Like, I think I don't know how I feel about the Me Too movement in general. I mean, almost as soon as that hashtag started, people were trying to diagnose what it is and what its reach should be. And I feel my attitude about things like this when they come up is always wait and see. Like, this thing will figure itself out, because any kind of grassroots activism of any sort, even the weird kind of cyberpunk versions we're getting nowadays that almost seem to happen completely on Twitter, these things, it takes a while for things to shake out. There are always people looking to jump. Anybody who's been to any kind of activist event can tell you that there's always people looking to jump on or hitch their wagon to whatever the fight is at the moment and try to use it to platform their own special interests. So when I went to Occupy, which we had our own local version of, there was all kinds of different political activists trying to steal some of that juice to get their own thing going, right? And I think Me Too is susceptible to that a little bit. There's people who are jumping onto it. I don't know if I would say it's run its course.
I definitely think it's important. And I feel like I'm being pedantic when I call it, when I lump everything into quote unquote the Me Too movement, because I know it's its own thing, and I know there are, I feel like I'm being simplifying it when I just say the Me Too movement to encompass everything I'm talking about. But I mean, I feel
it's hard to pin it down. It's really complicated, right? But I mean, you did say that like this Bryan Singer thing is why this shit exists in the first place, and you're right about that. So I don't feel I feel like it does every time. It feels like it's quieting down, like the point's been made, and now we get to deal with the aftermath. Like, how are we going to handle things from here on in? Something new comes out, and I don't know if that's just the fact that everybody's turn is just coming, and that's kind of what this really is, or if it's more like there's people who are that are campaigning actively to make sure the ones who are the most slippery, the most Teflon people, like Bryan Singer has been for two decades, are actually getting their day in the spotlight, where you don't want to be right now for this stuff. If somebody's hashtag Me Tooing you do not want to be in that spotlight, man. like if that's it. But apparently the controversy isn't that Bryan Singer's been outed, because he's been outed before, big time, and he's only the director of Bohemian Rhapsody in name. is what I hear, that he kind of left that production or was forced out, and it's just his name attached to it, which is something that happens more than most people would believe in movies. There's lots of ghost-directed movies out there.
And for what I understand, Bohemian Rhapsody was nominated for Oscar, but Bryan Singer wasn't. Just, I mean, his name is on it, but, you know, distance, that kind of thing. But
I don't think he'll show up, and if he does, there'll probably be some interesting drama the next day, which will be worth watching. But what's interesting about this controversy is actually Avi Lerner, the guy you clarified for me because I'd forgotten who exactly it was, but he's the guy who assaulted Terry Crews. You know, because we're reaching a point now where it's not just about women getting assaulted and harassed. We're also going to talk about how men get harassed and assaulted as well. And Terry Crews kind of got the ball rolling on that. And now we're talking about Bryan Singer within that same umbrella, because it's not women that he assaults and harasses, it's men, including some pretty big names, some of which are men that have passed on, actually. Like Brad Renfro, he's been accused of, you know, having something to do with Brad Renfro's fall into drugs and depression, and I don't know what the truth is about that. I don't think anybody really does that's talking about it. But the big controversy that Avi Lerner went on to say that all the accusations about Bryan Singer are fake news, and that Bryan Singer's definitely going to be the guy who directs Red Sonja. So his next movie is Red Sonja, and Red Sonja...
Wait, hold on. Let me correct something. Wait, what's the guy who groped Terry Crews is Adam Venitz. I think I may have...
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. All right.
I heard you say the name, and I'm in my head. I was like, yeah, that's the guy. But no, it's Adam
Avi
Venitz.
Adam.
Yeah, so let me correct that for the record. Sorry about that.
Vienna. Okay, right. So, but Avi Lerner is defending Bryan Singer. I think Avi Lerner has something to do with the Terry Crews thing, though. Like, maybe it's his company that represents that guy. I don't know.
Oh, he threatened them. Okay.
Right. Yeah. He tried to get Crews blacklisted, is what it is. He threatened them and tried to use William Morris, the talent agency, to... You know, and it's Adam Venit is all in there. So these guys are all involved with each other anyway. So it's not really to anybody's surprise that Avi Lerner is defending Bryan Singer. To a lot of people, it'll feel like it's just the same boys club covering each other's asses, right?
Yeah.
But the idea that Bryan Singer is just gonna continue to fail upward is where the controversy comes from, because this is a director who... A lot of people like the X-Men movies. I don't particularly care for them, so I don't think he's made a good movie since the 90s. And he should have been in director jail a long time ago. Never mind being like a guy who like touches young men or boys. You know, so fuck him, kind of. You know, I hope that there's an outrage and an outcry, and that he doesn't get away with this time.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's been enough movie news and controversy for one day. Let's get to why everybody came here. So from this point forward, we're going to review Serenity.
You know how in Plymouth they like to say everybody knows everything? It wouldn't be funny if the truth was that nobody knows anything. How long have I been on Plymouth Island?
Feels like we've all been here forever.
What's this?
Just a little scratch.
All right, that was from the trailer for Serenity, new Matthew McConaughey movie. Before we get started, let me ask, I don't know too much about Stephen Knight. I think he hasn't, I think it's what, third or fourth movie or something like that.
Right. Well, I mean, Stephen Knight is more of a writer than a director. But I've seen Redemption, his Jason Statham movie, which was okay. It wasn't amazing, but it was all right. Locke is really, really good, especially if you're a Tom Hardy fan. But he has TV shows that he writes for, particularly Peaky Blinders and Taboo, both of which are excellent, excellent shows. So I actually had forgotten that this was his movie until the end credits.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah. Name didn't really ring a bell for me. Like, Peaky Blinders, I'm one of those types that I get too, I don't know, queasy when I'm watching con men type movies, when they're in that situation where they might get found out, or, you know, whatever that is. And Peaky Blinders just had too many of those in the first, to where they had to, it was the script that got him out of the situation, because he was just so backed into a corner that I'm squirming. I don't know, it's a really weird reason to be turned off from a show, but that's what it was for me. I feel like the whole thing is just him finding ways not to get found out, and that's just, I don't know, that doesn't interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I like con men movies. I like the Oceans type movies where they're scamming people, grifting people, whatever. But I don't like the, you're gonna find out who I am type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you're like describing so much crime fiction too. Like I feel like so much crime fiction, especially now, is about how many basketballs can the main character keep spinning in the air before they all start falling over.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you watched The Shield, which was a big show for a while.
I heard it was really good, but I never watched that either.
It was, but you would have had the same problem with it. Like that show is all about how many basketballs. Thankfully, though, like Shield is an ensemble show, so like it has several different storylines going on. So it's not all about the main guy spinning basketballs. But Peaky Blinders is a lot more just connected to Tom Shelby, played by Cillian Murphy. Anyway, it's a great show. Have you watched Taboo?
I have never even heard of it.
Oh, it's the Tom Hardy and his dad came up with the concept for it, and then Stephen Knight helped them write a bunch of the episodes and co-created it. And that is a good show, but it's very strange.
All right, well, let's get around talking to it. I know you love Locke, so how do you think Serenity held up? Is that did you enjoy Serenity?
I did. I heard that it was terrible going into it, so I had low expectations. I did not know what to expect. I thought the trailer made the movie look like a neo-noir, with some strange undertones, because like the trailer suggests that there's something weirder going on, and I thought the movie was pretty much that. Like, it's mostly kind of like a certain type of neo-noir that mostly deals with like kind of a bayou sensibility, so it's kind of got this greasy, gritty tinge to everything. It reminded me a little bit of this movie with Matt Dillon from years back called Wild Things. That was a very sleazy, like,
Wild
movie.
Things was a huge movie, very cultural impact. You don't have to talk about it like it's an obscure movie. Everybody knows.
I thought it was. I didn't know that people knew what that shit was, man. Yeah, I know why it's famous if it is, but nobody I knew had seen it when I was like in high school and stuff, but I watched it when I was like 15 or younger than that even. Yeah. But yeah, so it reminded me of that a little bit. And then like, as we'll get into in the spoilers, there's a pretty big twist that reframes the whole movie, happens about halfway through, and the movie really commits to that, which I thought was kind of impressive. Its commitment was impressive. I don't know if it entirely works, but I think that they try really hard to make it work, especially by using the performances. Matthew McConaughey is really good in this movie, like really good, and probably won't get the credit he deserves for it. But then again, we're in the McConaissance, so I mean, he's good in almost everything he does these days. Yeah. But I don't know how much more I can say without spoiling it until you get your turn. Yeah, so what did you think?
We're really going to have to, it's hard to really kind of talk about what this movie is without going into spoilers, so this may not be the longest section, but
general impressions.
Yeah, I don't think I like this. I'll put it like that. This is one of those things where I'm glad, I had a little bit of time to sit with this. I saw it last night, so I've been kind of thinking about it throughout the day, and it's not one of those you walk out, this is good, this is bad. You kind of really got to sit with this one to let it kind of settle. And I don't even remember watching the trailer, but I kind of know what it was about. But so I got the kind of vibe that it was a drama, but with a twist. I think there were some, I don't know if it was supernatural vibes I was getting from the trailer, but that's kind of what I thought this would be. And I won't really get into it, but there is, a twist in here, and I don't know if I like that. I think same kind of what I was talking about with Shyamalan last week, that the twist makes you kind of recontextualize the whole movie, and I think this one, it's even more more prominent, or more, it really shapes what the movie is when you find out kind of what the twist is, and then even further later on, so I think I appreciated the performances, like I said, but when you're talking about Matthew McConaughey, I think his first line in the movie, he was sounded so Matthew McConaughey, it's just kind of, he's become the Matthew McConaughey. He's become a stereotype for who he plays. And I think the first few lines of the movie, you really, you got that this guy is playing, the Matthew McConaughey personality, So I don't necessarily think that the acting asked a whole lot of him. I feel like he played Matthew McConaughey in this movie, and I think he did that well. I think, he really worked. I think I appreciate it. I think he fit exactly what the script was asking him to be, but I don't know necessarily that I like this movie. I really want to compare it to something else. As I walked out, I said, okay, this is exactly like blank movie, but I can't talk about that.
I had a few thoughts like that. I had a few thoughts like that too.
I can't say what that movie is without, being a big spoiler as to what this movie is. But,
Right.
I think I like that other movie better than I like this one because it's, like I say, it's really hard to discuss what I didn't like about this movie without getting into the twist because it's so big a part of what this movie is. But I mean, before that, I did like the kind of the personal nature of this movie. I did like the interpersonal conversations. I like the storytelling without telling a story. You really get to know who this guy is and what his life is like. And, I really thought that part was interesting. Honestly, I think before the twist, this was a better movie. I really liked what that movie would have been,
Go
ahead.
I think I would have too. I mean, I wouldn't have hated it if the movie had stayed in its like island noir, kind of greasy, sweat-soaked kind of mode that was in. But if you got to have a movie that to me, okay, so we're talking like, let me just rewind a minute to Matthew McConaughey's performance. I've already like said that it's great. So I'm not gonna really double back on that, but I know what you mean when you say that he kind of plays Matthew McConaughey a little bit. Like, there is a certain kind of post-True Detective drama, like, intensity that Matthew McConaughey does now a lot. And I think it originated really with Russ Cole in True Detective. But contextually, I think the performance only matters really after the twist is revealed. That's when it gets interesting. That's when he's not really playing Matthew McConaughey anymore. And we'll get into that more later, and we'll see if I can get you to agree with me about that. But I do think if it had stayed in that mode, in that noir mode, it would have been okay. I love noir films. It's one of my favorite genres. You asked me earlier off mic, what's my genre? That would be near the top of the list, noir, like detective stories kind of, right? And this movie fits all those tropes super duper well, especially in the first half. So I like that a lot. But what I like about the twist is that it happens halfway through the movie. A lazier movie or a movie that was really going for some kind of shock value there would have done it in the last 10 minutes and basically left you with like an ambiguous impression of what the twist means. And I mean, that can be done really well too. In lots of movies, it's done super well. Shyamalan is actually an interesting person to mention because some of his movies do that and they do it really well. But in this, they do it. They get there really early on, and then they leave you with this new version of the movie that you're watching. And I like it or not, because I can't really blame you for not liking it. It's ballsy. I had to respect that.
Honestly, I kind of disagree there. I feel like you either put that twist at the beginning and the whole movie is kind of developing that into what it becomes at the end, or you put it at the very end and it just, that's the twist. And I know we're talking about, talking around it, and I hate to be so big picture, but, I really, if you're thinking about watching this movie, you've seen the trailers, you don't want the spoiler before you go in there. And
no,
I've also seen some people on Twitter just ruining it by spoiling it. So don't look it on Twitter, so yeah, I'm going to keep talking around it, but understand it's for a reason. Kind of want to segue to what you were talking about the noir. I feel like, Anne Hathaway's character and Jeremy Strong, who also I loved in Succession. So he really stood out to me here. But honestly, I think Anne Hathaway's performance was almost kind of a throwaway. I feel like that could have been anybody. I don't feel like she necessarily brought anything to the role, and I think that's what made this a noir film is her performance. I think that character, everything out her mouth felt like something in it didn't fit the movie, but I think it felt like something out of a 1960s, noir film or whatever. I feel like that's who that character was. Somebody shot my husband. Can you track him down, detective? That's exactly what her character
was. She's the breathy femme fatale. I think you're onto something. Like, she's the most obvious noir trope. Like, as soon as she walks into the movie in that white dress with that hat or whatever, and she's smoking a cigarette, like, exactly what she is. But I think it's just the most obvious of the noir tropes the movie's doing. Not the only one. I mean, even the way there's some subversions of this that we can get into in the spoilers too, like ways that it handles a normal way a detective movie would work in its own unique way. We can get into that later, but I want to talk about Anne Hathaway's performance a little bit with you, since we don't have to spoil the movie to do that. I think Anne Hathaway's an interesting person to talk about, kinda. Like, do you like? Can you think of a performance she's given that's been like an all-timer besides maybe like Brokeback Mountain? Because that's one where I like was like, oh, she's like a real, like she's like the real deal. She's not just the Princess Diaries. But can you think of any other ones that have like really?
I got to go to the obvious one, saying Les Mis, because that's probably my favorite musical.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I've got a Les Mis tattoo on me, so that's kind of that's the bee's knees for me.
You got tattoos?
I do. I have a Les Mis tattoo, but I don't think her performance. I mean, her singing was great, but I think her range and kind of what was asked of her, I think she really kind of knocked it out of the park with Les Mis. I think that proved that she's, well, I wouldn't say proof because she's been in a lot of great stuff. I really like Love and Other Drugs. I think her performance in that was stellar.
Oh yeah, that's
like I said, she's just been in so many awesome movies. You can, she's an A1 actress, but I feel like her being in this movie, I think they thought it would be a cheat. It would add gravitas to it just because of her character, but I think it actually took it away. I think a Michelle Williams in that role would have. I would have preferred her acting. I think Michelle Williams could have kind of brought more out of that role. I think Anne Hathaway, you just kind of, because of who she is, you take that in the movie with her. And I think somebody like Michelle Williams probably would have made it more personalized, more specialized, and not so much as a cheat. But I mean, honestly, it's just because of where the movie goes. We're honestly going to have to delve into that and spoilers as well. So I don't really want to get too far into it. So let's kind of talk, like I said, generally, again, I think we were talking about Diane Lane a second ago. Off the mic, but we talked about Diane Lane. I loved her performance. I love her and everything. She's gorgeous. She's an excellent actress.
She's the best. Yeah.
I think her, kind of in contrast to what I said about Anne Hathaway, I think she's perfect just because of who she is. When she's not on screen, when she's when she's not speaking, when you're just seeing her, look through blinds or something like that, she brings that to the role where you kind of get what she is just by her facial expressions. You know who that character is, and you really appreciate that role just because of her acting. So I think I honestly like Diane Lane acting in this better than Anne Hathaway's.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, when we're thinking about though, there's an interesting question that I think is raised by your take on Anne Hathaway's performance and just her role in the movie, which is it okay for an actress of her stature? Because even though I asked you what has she done that's so great, I think she's great. I think she's awesome, especially if you think of her in an old school Hollywood kind of way, which is there's not a lot of actresses her age that I think are as dynamic and have as much range. But anyway, the question I want to ask from that is it okay for an actress of her stature to occupy a tropey kind of almost stock role in a movie like this just for the fun of it? Like, is it maybe intentional? Did Stephen Knight go, as soon as she walks on camera, the audience is going to know what we're going for here, and that's exactly what we need. And Anne Hathaway doing it just brings that class just up a little bit. Yeah. Well, not that she's the only one who could have. I don't think she's essential. But
I think that's a personal preference thing, because for me, it didn't work because of who she was. But for somebody else, it might have, Mm-hmm. I think that shortcut, just seeing her in that role, may have worked for somebody else and kind of brought that role fuller. But just for me, because of who she was and because the actual character didn't require a whole lot, I think it didn't really work for me. It's just kind of a cheat, and it was kind of a stock character rather than an actual, character with
we'll return to this idea of stock characters in the spoilers, because it's actually, that question is so relevant to this movie that if you haven't seen it yet and you're hearing this for some reason, you have no idea. But yeah, I mean, my last thought on her is that I could see other actresses in that role, but there is a line between casting someone who would be distracting, and I feel like Anne Hathaway is shy of that line. Like, it's not distracting to me that it's Anne Hathaway. You know what I mean? Like, she doesn't run away with the movie. She doesn't, like, if it was maybe like a Jennifer Lawrence or something like that, it'd feel a little bit more like, oh, look at me, it's Jennifer Lawrence. But that could just be associations with the movies that Jennifer Lawrence chooses to be in. You could really compare this to, but you could throw any actress of the same age category and skill set in this place and try to figure out, like, you mentioned Michelle Williams, and I think you're right. She would have been great here, right? Carey Mulligan would have been great here. Like, but yeah, we could do this all day. So what do you think? Time to move on to spoilers?
I think we're doing too much talking around it. So I just kind of, in general, honestly, I didn't care for it. I think the end kind of made it fizzle out for me, but I think the first half of it was a very interesting movie, really interesting. And I think if you're even semi-interested in going to see this one, I think you're going to enjoy it. I think you may walk out of it getting more than even I did. I think it's worth seeing, not only for the performances, but for the acting. It's just kind of where it goes. It's like I said, I think we've already spoiled it. It does have a twist. So, you may have, sorry for spoiling even that much by you going into it, but I definitely think it's worth seeing. So, if you are interested in seeing, I say go see it, but we got more in spoilers. What about you?
Yeah, I recommend it. It's a movie I respect more than love. Like I said, I think it's got a lot of boldness in the twist and its commitment to it, which I can only respect, even if it doesn't all come together. I like the first half a lot too, probably more than the second half because I just love noir. And the second half kind of upends that a little bit. But like in general, it's the kind of movie that I like I said earlier, it's a January dump, I think, because the studio didn't know what to do with it. Like it's the kind of movie that I would never want to market, because if I was marketing this movie, I would not know how to get people to come see it besides basically lying and saying it's what it isn't, right? How do you get around that? And then somebody comes in and they're almost set up for disappointment because the movie pretends to be one thing and then it's another thing, and there's no way you can be ready for that until you actually sit down and watch it.
Indeed. All right, so listeners, from this point forward, spoilers for Serenity.
Some weird stuff going on right now. This whole island's a part of it, but nobody knows it.
Okay, John, you want the truth?
All right, now that we're in spoilers, source code, right? that's the first thing I thought about when walking out of this movie. I said, this is a worse version of source code, and I wish I knew that going into it.
That's not
what
I
you thought about. I couldn't. That's the most blatant, I guess, ripoff. That's exactly what this is in my head.
I don't think it's a ripoff, but
same general principle.
I love source code. I got it on Blu-ray. Like that movie is underrated, but like. I didn't think about that just because source code's idea of the meta fiction is very, very different, and it does reveal it really early on. And then the whole movie is wrapped around that in a different way. It's not what I thought of. I thought of like movies like, I even thought of The Fountain. I thought of stories and movies where somebody's trapped in a book. And one of the things that I thought about when I was watching this was that, okay, wait a minute, let's rewind. So the twist. The twist is that halfway through the movie, we find out that Matthew McConaughey is actually a digital version recreated from a kid's dad. And the kid is like a math genius and a computer genius. And he's programming a game as an escape from his abusive household. And Matthew McConaughey is his dad, who died in a war in Iraq. And he's kind of recreated his dad so that he can connect to him. But he's also doing something with this game world he's created where he's trying to work up the courage to do something about his abusive stepfather.
Yeah, so let me clarify that, because basically there's two different twists. The middle of the movie twist is when you find out via Jeremy Strong's character that this is a game and he's in a game. And it isn't until the end of the movie where you find out this is all more or less a coping mechanism that he's created on his computer as a way to, convince himself. It started out as a coping mechanism to protect himself while his mom is getting beat. And towards the end of the game, it was a way to, towards the end of the movie, it was a way to convince himself to kill his dad, more or less. So I just kind of want to separate the two twists, because we don't find out that he's been dead until the very end, throughout.
I kind of knew, though.
Well,
it seemed pretty...
I think that it makes it, seems kind of obvious, but you don't know it until the very end of the movie, which is why I think, we'll get to it later, but it was kind of where the whole movie falls apart for me. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Like that's a really good clarification. Yeah, because there is two separate twists, right? Although when you guess at what the twist is, might not be exactly when we did. For me, I knew the movie was a video game pretty early on. I knew that Plymouth Island, where it takes place, wasn't a real place very quickly. And I had some ideas about what it was. The lamest one, which I'm glad they didn't do, was that it was some kind of purgatory. In a sense, it is still symbolically, but I'm glad they didn't go with the whole, he's dead and he's just trying to solve a problem so that he can move on to the afterlife. Because that's a really tired cliche. But something I want to point out, though, I feel like the confusion around this movie, which I've seen time and time again in the critical reception of it, and also you could say maybe that you could speculate that confusion is why it was released in January with almost no fanfare, is because it's about a video game and not a book. If this was a guy trapped or realizing that they're actually a character in a book or a character in a movie, it would not be as weird or off-putting as it is that it's a video game. I strongly believe that, because we've all seen hopefully we've all seen The Truman Show, and we've seen stories or movies like Pleasantville, where the idea is that, characters realize slowly that they're actually in some kind of metafiction or some kind of fictional universe, and the story becomes about either escaping that universe or becoming aware of it or whatever. Even The Matrix is kind of like that. In this movie, it is literally a video game. And I just don't think I play video games. I know you do too, but you're not as into it as me. We're just not at a point yet, I don't think, as a culture where we can take that seriously. That video games have reached a point where they're the same level of media as movies and books. And if it was different, I feel like this movie would be more successful, and there'd be a little less of a jarring feeling when you do get that twist, because I feel like some of the sense that it doesn't work comes from the fact that it's a video game.
Well,
it seems sillier somehow because of that. I think.
Well, I don't think it's sillier. I think it's the whole movie doesn't make sense to me at that point, because it's not even really a video game. It's more an AI construct from the AI's point of view. That's fair. That's why it kind of falls apart, because we're not watching him play a video game. It's not that the kid is super smart and created a video game and is playing the video game. It's that he's created an artificial intelligence with the same point of view as his dead father. And he's only like 14 or something like that.
Yeah,
so
he's young.
I
don't know if I agree with that.
Because the whole, second half of the movie, giving his dad the idea to kill his stepdad, but also trying to prevent him from doing it. He's
not preventing it. It's the game. Okay.
Well, I know that's what I'm saying. So it's not that he's decided to kill his dad and he's going to, play the system and, play the game to where he can defeat the masters, or whatever, defeat the dungeon trolls trying to stop him from killing his dad. It's that the game is designed to push him not to do it.
Right.
And he wants it done. So he's basically just watching the AI, hoping the AI does it. It doesn't really make sense, because apparently, the whole point of the movie and the point of the ending is that he's, the Matthew McConaughey character is autonomous. He's smart. He's making his own decisions. Right. And the son is kind of pushing him to do it. And he's just kind of waiting to see what happens. And then when his dad does decide to actually kill the stepfather character, that's when the kid, through his coping mechanism, whatever, decides that, okay, then now is the time. I'm really going to go kill my stepdad or whatever. So that's kind of where it falls apart, because it doesn't make sense that we're watching an AI, we don't have that type of technology, and B, it's just, I don't know, just when you take that as the central aspect of what the movie is, and then think about that in the context of the rest of the movie, the whole thing just kind of falls apart for me, and that's why it just really didn't work,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I disagree with your take, kind of. There's just some nuances or specifics that I think change it a little bit. So, for one thing, we almost, we don't have the technology to create self-aware AI that we know of, but there's a bit in the movie. Well, yeah, that we know of. There's a bit in the movie though where we see kind of like one of those weird shots of the island that there's a lot of weird shots in this movie that are an early indicator that there's something going on.
Yeah.
Even before we see the actual kid on the computer and kind of get it, we see him, there's a lot of hints anyway that this movie is going to where it goes.
That's why I kind of agree with you. I thought it was at purgatory at first, kind of, because it's kind of how weird things were.
But as soon as you see the kid playing a game under his sheet that he hides under where he's fishing, I kind of knew something was up with that. But where I think you and I differ on our take here is that like there's a throwaway part of the movie where you hear some voiceover lines that sound like they're coming from like YouTube videos or talking heads or professors or whatever that are talking about like machine learning and AI and stuff, and how an independent system could become self-aware spontaneously. And that's a hint that that's pretty much what's happened to Matthew McConaughey's character. So Baker Dill is his character's name, and yeah, Dill's a stand-in or a recreation of his dad, coded with some of the same personality traits that the kid remembers from when he was young. And like there's like a kind of like a thread there where I feel like, and I think you would agree with me, that Baker Dill is the only self-aware consciousness, fully self-aware consciousness in the program. Yeah. Jeremy Strong's character is almost there, but the idea is that this kid is programmed a world, and it is a game because, like Jeremy Strong explains, the island has different games that the kid plays. Right?
I think Jeremy Strong. Hold on. I think Jeremy Strong is self-aware. I don't know if you watched The Good Place, but there's an AI.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, there's an AI in that. I think Jeremy Strong is self-aware in the same way that AI is.
I agree. That's a good connection. They
know what's going on and they can kind of make their own decisions, but they're not necessarily. They don't necessarily have free will, quote unquote. Right. They just kind of can make decisions within the parameters of the rules.
Yeah, like Karen, right? Karen's my favorite character in The Good Place. But yeah, that's actually a really good connection. And like, I agree with you. So he keeps saying he represents the rules. And the movie has this whole thing about the rules and the rules changing. And that's because I think the kid has programmed a world that's meant to, like, it's basically like if you were going to play a game and it's a digital world or a fantasy world you're playing in the game, and then you can just do different things in the game that are in themselves mini games, right? So one of the mini games is Baker Dill is obsessed with catching a fish. So that's one of the ways the kid in his real life has programmed this game to escape. He has a connection with his dad about fishing, so he creates a character like his dad who he plays as to go fishing. Then he gets the idea that he's going to kill his stepdad, and he programs in a version of his mother and a version of his stepdad, both of which are larger than life and composed out of stock character tropes from noir fiction and crime fiction. I mean, Jason Clarke is really good in this movie, but the character he's playing is really cartoonish. Just a cartoonish bad guy. Yeah. And that's on purpose, I think. Just like I would argue that Anne Hathaway's character is purposefully a stock character.
That's what I wanted to wait for spoilers to talk about. Right. Is that yes, I thought her being here was a little bit of a cheat, which was a little, I don't know, over the top, which, you know, I just felt like she was playing a stock character role. But B, if this is a video game, then that's exactly who she would be. So, right. You know,
it's a bit meta. Yeah, it's like a meta way of getting away with it, right?
So without, you know, watching it as the video game, then she, you know, doesn't work and kind of doesn't make sense. But I guess in the context of the fact that you're watching a video game, yes, she makes sense and she should be that because she's not a real person. She's just a, you know, stock character, you know, but yeah.
Right. And I mean, I've seen lots of indie sci-fi movies that pull a twist like this out of their ass in the last act, and it doesn't work because it just can't possibly support everything we've seen. Like, if you think about it for too long, it all just falls apart like a house of cards. And I feel like Knight is smart enough to know that. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna commit to this twist halfway through the movie. So halfway through the movie, Baker Dill is told basically something about that he's long suspected, that his reality isn't real. And he's told this by Jeremy Strong, who puts it in terms of, it's an exposition dump a little bit, telling him, oh, it's a kid making a video game. And because Baker Dill has already experienced weird things, he's had these weird psychic kind of connections with his kid that are through the like matrix of this video game, but like manifest themselves in a more straightforward, I guess, supernatural psychic connection thing. All that stuff.
That's where it began to fall apart for me, because when he heard his son's voice, I didn't know if he was just losing his stuff, because the first time it was just kind of an echo, but the second time it was kind of a real, you know, more or less he's talking to the son. And then at that point I was like, okay, then where does this go? If that's a real thing that happens in this movie, then we're going to end on a really weird place, because I don't know how that exists in this world and in a way that makes sense. And kind of pushing back onto you a little bit, if he is playing the father, then he's just playing against himself and he's going to kill the dad either way, and which doesn't make sense. Or if his father is AI, then, you know, the whole thing just kind of, the concept of what it is doesn't make sense. And then you're talking about him playing games. Well, if he is playing the games, trying to fish, then he is the father character. So the
I
father
think he
character
was.
isn't an AI. Well, that's the thing. And then, and if you're talking about the was, then the Chase the Cat game is basically him fucking Diane Lane. So,
well, yeah, I mean, if you were 14 years old and could
well, no, then it's a weird masturbatory thing where he's pretending to be his dad having sex with another lady, and that's weird.
Well, it is.
Levels,
is.
You know?
I think it's intentionally weird.
Yeah.
But I do think it makes sense though, and I think it makes sense in a really because I feel like he didn't really. So he's created this. The point I was trying to make is he's created this system, right? And it works with certain rules, and it has like a kind of a closed loop, right? Like the characters are sort of autonomous within their prime directive. They all have a thing they're supposed to do. So Matthew McConaughey's character is supposed to catch the fish. Jimon Hunsu's character is supposed to help him, so on and so forth, right? All the Islander characters are there to like sort of facilitate all this stuff. And who knows if the kid is role playing different characters at different times. We don't see that, right? And one of the things this movie sort of is asking us to buy into, which is hard to do at face value, is the gritty realism of the world we're seeing when we're with Matthew McConaughey as some kind of video game world. It's kind of hard to buy that, even though video games are at a point now where the graphics are almost photorealistic. It's still not at a point where I can really like imagine that the kid is like. I just feel like you're supposed to like kind of add a certain amount of like imaginative flourish to the idea that this would look at all real. But I think the kid is doing all this stuff, and it's not until he programs a loophole or a sort of like counter programming thing into his own game world where murder is possible that Matthew McConaughey's character becomes self-aware. Yeah. And a great deal of the second act of the movie is spent on Matthew McConaughey wondering if he's insane and trying to grapple with that. And pretty quickly he's like, no, I don't think I'm crazy, but he comes back and forth on it. And that's where I think the meat of his performance really is like this way that this character archetype, this kind of taciturn, alcoholic, macho, like noir stock character grapples with the idea of being real or not real. So one of the movies that this reminded me of was The 13th Floor, actually. And Vanilla Sky, and like a whole host of other ones that deal with the same idea. We've mentioned The Matrix, we've mentioned Source Code, you know. There's tons of movies out there about an AI becoming self-aware or suddenly understanding what it is. And I feel like what makes that possible for Baker Dill is the fact that the kid is fucking with his own game in such a way that it makes it possible for spontaneous AI to emerge. And then when he realizes that's what's happening, that he's in communion with it, and it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like simulacra. Like, at what point does a version of your dad that you put into a computer game become so real to you, or so real in a certain sense that the difference is not that important anymore? Right?
I think that's exactly why I felt like it was Source Code, because at the end of the Source Code, you know, he was basically a real person. So, one
of the fucked up things about Source Code, though, is that he steals another guy's life to be. Yeah. That's one of the things I love about that movie, is that ending is dark. It's really dark. But
it's all a computer generated. I don't know. It's weird.
It's not. Source Code is arguing that you can use a computer to basically create alternate timelines that might as well be real, because it's just like at the end of the day, all of everything we're doing and thinking and saying is code anyway on some level. So it's an argument the Matrix makes as well, which is that like the digital, if it's so close to being real that it might as well be real, how do you tell the difference, and what difference is there really? It's a philosophical question, right?
But in Source Code, the whole universe is just computer generated. So
well, it turns out that's not the case.
I'm saying I think that's what the end is playing with. She's hoping that if she turns off the computer at the exact perfect time, he'll keep living in that dream world. And the end is ambiguous as to whether or not that happens. So
I think the movie argues, though, that these dream worlds are real worlds for all intents and purposes. So I think what's cool about that ending is that he body jumps into a dude, and that dude is erased. And I think that's kind of fucked up, you know, in a really awesome way, you know. But whatever, source code. So in terms of Serenity, doesn't ever get that fucked up, unless you're like, I mean, it is fucked up to a certain extent. This idea that he's role playing his dad, sort of fucking a middle-aged woman for money, and that's just a thing that this kid does to get his kicks. But at the same time, if you read this kid as being really socially maladjusted, possibly autistic or on the spectrum somewhere, which is kind of a feeling I got from him, although the movie doesn't really say either way, which I think it's to its credit. But either way, I mean, what does a teenager want to do with a digital world? Like, kind of play around and sort of play act being different models of what an adult would be like. And I kind of feel like that all feels like something you would do. And I mean, if his model for masculinity is his dad, then yeah, it's fucked up in a kind of Freudian way. But it's also, it makes a certain amount of sense to me. Even though it's screwed up, it makes a sense. You know, I don't think I would play a game where I was being my dad banging women, but
it's the fact that I guess so. If we're taking your viewing of it, your perception of it, then he started out playing the character. Then, you know, I guess by cheating or by telling the dad, you know, that he was in a video game, then he became quote unquote real and whatnot. And then at the end of the movie, when he's sitting in jail, you know, how is he affecting the game? Is this a time jump where this is, you know, years in the future when he's out of jail and he's back editing the game? Is Matthew McConaughey, I'm saying, is he in some kind of purgatory hell where he just, you know, this exists, but the world is controlled by his son? And then, you know, then in a source code sort of way, one day, eventually the son is going to turn off the computer or die, or, you know, whatever happens. Then does Matthew McConaughey cease to exist? And 20 years before that, does he want to die, but he can't die because he's a computer? You know, it's just, I think that's really dark as well. And, you know,
well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the cool things with this movie, if we take it as science fiction, which it actually is, I think, is that you can think about all those kinds of things. And that's something it does have in common with source code, is you can really just roll into the questions about what happens there and the implications. But in this movie, I think what we're seeing, what the ending is a little bit weird. Because, yeah, the kid is communicating with his dad without the computer. It's all totally mental. And I think that's just basically a flourish that is supposed to say that this whole world that the kid's created, Plymouth Island, is in his head. And whether he's coding it into reality on his computer or he's just dreaming it up in his head, it's basically the same thing. And I mean, I don't know if everybody would be able, like, watching it would really want to roll with that. Because it seems like if you mitigate an idea like that with something like concrete, like computer code, such as it is, that you could sort of believe it a little bit more. But if there's no real clear line between the computer code and the kid's imagination, then it kind of maybe it feels like it falls apart. I don't think it does. I feel like this is what also led to people in the second Matrix movie when it ended. There was this really popular theory that I always thought was stupid, which is that it's a matrix within a matrix, because how can Neo affect the matrix or affect the machines when he's not in the matrix? You know, like It's the same kind of thing. It's like there's a certain amount to which, philosophically, anything we do with our hands in the world is an extension of our imaginations or our will anyway, and that's the wheelhouse that the Matrix is in, and that's where I think this movie is also. It's sort of saying that for this kid, it doesn't make a difference whether he's coded it into reality or whether he's just dreaming it up in his head. It's the same kind of thing.
But then that adds to the fact that if he dreams it up in his head and they're communicating that way, then when he gets back to his computer, he still has to physically do it, which is, you know, like I said, I think my biggest issue is that the rules. There are no, for a movie that literally has a character that is the embodiment of rules, the rules don't really make sense in this universe. And I prefer, if a movie, I like a movie to build the universe with a set of rules and then stick to those rules. And a movie fell apart for me personally because I don't think it did.
I get that. I feel like that's a valid criticism too, and I would need to think of it more and see it again to decide whether I agree. I do think that saying that it's about rules though is half the story, because the movie's really about what happens when the rules break down, when there are no more rules, and the chaos that ensues, and whether that chaos can be useful or not. So the movie is acknowledging this idea of rules, but it's also about what happens when the rules aren't getting followed, when the creator changes the rules, for instance, right? Because that's something that's bothering in his AI brain. Jeremy Strong is like, why would the creator change the rules? I'm supposed to help you catch the fish. But then he's like, but if the creator wants me to help you kill a guy, then that's what I'm going to do. So they're sort of like us in a way, where like they're trying to interpret the will of their creator all the time, right? Like, where if you're a religious person, there's questions that arise out of that, like where, you know, what does God really want, you know? And that's something Jeremy Strong is sort of like dramatizing in a very tangible and simplistic way, right? It's not really theology. It's sort of like a version of that though, where like they're grappling with these free will versus determinism questions, and what happens if you have a binary choice, but one of the choices that you make breaks the world. Like, I think all that stuff's really interesting, so I respect it, but I lean sort of towards where you're at, where I'm not 100% sure that it works.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it may work on a more philosophical level than, than what we actually have here. So, but I don't know. I think that pretty much sums up. I mean, we're kind of talking about it in circles at this point. We kind of agree that, I think it works a little bit better for you than it does for me, but we both agree that it was, not a terrible movie, and it was worth seeing for both the acting and, the storyline. So, I think at the end of the day, I probably would recommend you see it, just, not necessarily for the story, but just for the performances and kind of how, I appreciate directors that take a swing. And I think this, this may not have worked for me perfectly, but I think it was a good attempt, and I like people that make interesting movies, and, so I would recommend it. What about you?
Yeah, I recommend it. I recommend giving it a chance. Movies like this don't come along that often, especially not with talent this good. It reminded me a little bit of a Jason Statham movie from years back made by Guy Ritchie called Revolver that nobody liked. And I tend to, I personally tend to like to give these movies a chance. I think you feel the same way. So definitely go see it, see what all the fuss is about, see what you think. If you can come up with a more coherent theory of how this movie works than we did. But yeah, I think it's fun to think about, and that's something.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Serenity. Evan, where can people find more of your stuff on the internet?
You can find me in the wide internet at Evan Todd-McCoy at Twitter, or on Twitter. So that's at Evan Todd-McCoy, all one word, lowercase. You can see my reviews that I'm writing that are not on Sirrwaka.com, which is where I write reviews for Sterling. You can see those on thunderclown.wordpress.com. That's my personal blog. I just put up a review of Glass. It's 5,000 words long. It's lengthy and in-depth, so check it out. And there's also a review of Low Life, the movie I talked about at the beginning of this podcast, on there as well. Indeed.
You can find me on Twitter at Sirrwaka. You can follow the podcast at Sirr Movies on Twitter. Again, you can contact us at sirrmovies@gmail.com. Next week, we're actually going to be doing a more interesting episode. It's kind of light on movies this week. So we're actually going to do a top 5 most watchable movies that we enjoy. So tune in for that one. And that's it. See you next week.